Hello students. All right, so today we are going to start topic 9.4, plant reproduction, and we're going to start with the essential understanding. And the essential understanding states that success in plant reproduction depends on pollination, fertilization, and seed dispersal. So we're going to look at those different modes there. So first, let's make a distinction on the different ways that plants can reproduce. So plants can reproduce asexually via a process called vegetative propagation. And we talked a little bit about this last topic or last section when we said that there were similarities between micropropagation and vegetative propagation. But vegetative propagation is just taking that shoot apex and just planting it outside in its natural environment. And this is an asexual process. Also through spore formations in the example of ferns. I think this is a mistake because molds are not plants, they're fungi. And then there's sexual reproduction. And this is where transfer of pollen occurs, and this happens in flowering plants or angiosperms. So we're going to be focusing on sexual reproduction here. And pretty much everything else that we're going to talk about from this point forward is going to be sexual reproduction. So we're going to be looking at how flowering plants do this and how they transfer pollen, which includes the male gamete or the male sperm, to the ova, which is the egg, or it includes the female gamete. So we're going to look at these three distinct phases of pollination, fertilization, and seed dispersal. All right, so there's a nice little picture here showing you each type of reproduction stage. So you've all heard of pollination before, right? This is the transfer of pollen grains from an anther, which is the male plant structure, to the stigma, which is the female plant structure. So here in this picture, we see a pollinator, and this pollinator is taking here they drew it pretty big, but they're taking the pollen that's inside the anther. So this is the filament, this is the anther, and inside the anther, which is the male reproductive organ, we find the pollen. And this pollinator here can either allow this plant to self-pollinate, or it can take this pollen to another plant and allow for cross-pollination. So from an evolutionary perspective, cross-pollination is preferable because that's going to improve the genetic diversity and help out if, for example, this plant is attacked by a virus. It has a better chance of survival if there's some type of genetic diversity. The next stage would be fertilization, and this is the fusion of the male gamete nuclei with the female gamete nuclei to form a zygote. And again, the male gamete, which is the sperm, it's stored in the pollen grain, which is found right here in the anther of the flower. And the female gamete is found in the ovule or the egg. So we're going to look at the structure of the flower in the next video lesson, but you probably remember from 9th grade that this right here, right, is composed of the anther and the filament, and this is the male reproductive organ, and then here we find in this structure right here we find the female reproductive organ, and that's composed of the style, which is this tube here, and the stigma, which is where the pollen attaches, and then the ovule is found right here inside the ovary. So all of this would be the ovary of the plant, and then the ovule is found right here. So then the pollen can transfer, and the sperm can travel down the style into the ovary. and the egg of this flower. So then after fertilization of the egg happens, then a seed forms. So you have a formation of a seed, and the seed needs to be dispersed. And it's better that the seed gets dispersed far away from the parent plant to avoid competition for the same resources. So there's a variety of seed dispersal mechanisms that includes wind, water, fruits, and animals. Animals are the most common way to disperse seed, sorry. Sometimes they just carry the seed stuck in their fur. Sometimes they'll eat the fruit and then they'll poop out the seeds. And there's a reason why the seed structure varies in shape, because every seed has a different mechanism of dispersal. Okay, so moving down here, the next essential understanding is that most flowering plants use mutualistic relationships with pollinators in sexual reproduction. So we know that flowers and pollinators help each other out. So it is a mutualistic relationship. Both species are going to benefit. So what is the benefit of each? So the flowering plant gains a means of sexual reproduction because the pollinator is going to disperse the pollen, and the animal gains a source of nutrition because the pollinator is going to take advantage and eat the nectar of that plant, which is a sugar-rich substance. So the common examples of pollinators, which I'm sure you know some examples already, are birds, bats, and insects, including bees and butterflies. So the flower structure is optimized so that these pollinators can gain access to the nectar and can gain access to the pollen. So when this pollinator is trying to reach the nectar, inevitably it will touch the anther of the male stamen, and it's going to have the pollen stuck to its body parts. And then when it moves to a different flower, and it does the same thing, it's going to suck the nectar from the flower. It's going to pollinate it, and the pollen is going to land right there in the stigma of the female part, and that pollen, or the pollen grain, when it lands right there on the stigma, the sperm is actually going to travel via a pollen tube, via the style, into the ovary right here of the female reproductive organ. And when that sperm travels, it's going to fertilize the tiny little ovules right here, and it's going to produce a seed. So we're going to look at that in a little bit more detail when we study the structure of the flower.